Hello there. I wanted to document some of my thoughts and research on Jiddhu Krishnamurti, a name who keeps coming up. If you don't know the story, before the partition of India, when the British were still powerful, there were some esotericists in India, and they did a lot of research and a lot of practice with yoga, Buddhism, and all sorts of things that they were researching. And they found one day on a beach a young Indian boy, and one of them thought that he had some special energy, and they decided to educate him. And these were all professional occultists, professional spiritual gurus, Leadbeater, and they taught Krishnamurti for maybe 15 years. They taught him everything they knew. They wanted to model him to be a world teacher, to teach the rest of the world and be a new Messiah. At this point, I should say that the Catholic Church, by the way, still works for those who go. Everybody is always looking for a new Messiah. I can just tell you that the Catholic people, even if the Church is in decline, the practices themselves do still transform you and save you from death. But anyway, they wanted a new Messiah, and they trained this young Indian boy. And when you hear Jiddhu Krishnamurti speak, he sounds like he's been educated at Oxford. He's got one of these posh English accents. And when he was about 20, he turned around and stabbed them in the back. And he said, "I'm not going to be your goddamn Messiah. I'm not going to be part of your group. You can't control me." And then he went to America, and there he became a world teacher. And there were thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Americans used to come to see him. And he used to say to them, "Why don't you change?" Krishnamurti used to speak to his audience, and he used to say, "Why don't you change?" He said that to them for 50 years. And at the end of his life, he said that nobody had understood him. And nobody had understood him because he hadn't understood himself. The training that he had put him in an awakened state, probably the state of awareness. It didn't seem very stable. Stable states arise from long sitting practices and long intensive retreats. They're the kind of thing that the yogis and the Buddhists do. But if you learn in meetings or more on the fly, then your state is not very stable. That seems to be where Krishnamurti got to. And whatever Leadbeater and Annie Besant did to him and taught him worked. It simply worked. It took a huge amount of time and investment, and I think importantly, Krishnamurti may not have been looking for that. After all, he was just playing on a beach, and these English people picked him up and made a deal with his folks, who were only too happy to have him educated by the English. What they did worked, but he resented it. Perhaps he was racist or didn't like being sold off to the English. But whatever they had done to him had worked, and he went to America, and what he should have done, if he had been a good teacher, what he should have done is he should have done to his students exactly what was done to him. Whatever Leadbeater taught him, whichever yoga, meditation, contemplation, scriptures, whatever study they had done to him, he should have taught to his students. And presumably, they would have arrived in the same state. And Krishnamurti had 50 years of teaching. He had well enough time to do it. Freedom from thought, freedom from this, freedom from that. Sounds great, doesn't it? But the question is, how did he get into that state? How did you, Mr. Krishnamurti, how did you arrive where you are? because that is what I want to learn. That is what I need to learn to unfuck my life. I don't want to see you sitting on the throne telling me how wonderful it feels to be on the top of the mountain. I am here so that you teach me. Eckhart Tolle did exactly the same thing and does exactly the same thing with exactly the same results. Eckhart Tolle had some very good teachers. One was Barry Long. I recommend you go look him up. He's a really good guy. He has a very wonderful book called Making Love. And Eckhart Tolle had another teacher, Bo Yin Ra, who was a Christian mystic, of old school Christian mystic. They were great teachers. Now Eckhart Tolle is just like Krishnamurti. He sits on his throne and he has his vase with 3 or 4 flowers next to it. And he does not teach what he himself had been taught. He just speaks from the top of the mountain. In fact, him and Krishnamurti are in some sort of balcony, because awareness is a kind of partial state. It's not a real state. It's not a secured state. Because if you want a secured state, you have to do continuous and deep, intensive meditation, again and again and again, thousands of sittings over decades, just like the monks do. Only then does it become really secure, and only then, importantly, does the energy body mature, because the sitting practice itself, if you sit formally, it matures the energy bodies, meaning the higher being bodies, as Gurdjieff would say. They mature energetically. And so that's why Buddhists, even if they begin with awareness, they end up with maybe all the higher being bodies, because it's the long sitting that energetically matures these being bodies. And that's the weakness with these kind of new agey teachers. They teach on the fly, people come and go, and even if somebody feels something, even if somebody feels awareness, it's just not going to last. And for many people, they're not going to survive death, because their state is not secure enough. For some they might, but even if they do, because they don't have the intention to sit regularly in a formal way, their being bodies aren't there, so they have just the balcony. They have the balcony of awareness, which is like some small bubble of a state that is not secure and does not come with the integration of and the maturation of the higher being bodies, which takes time. It takes time to grow new bodies, you see. But like I said, the biggest thing is that these people, these two teachers who are very famous, they were taught a route up the mountain, but they do not teach it to their students. The human world is full of this kind of bullshit. Now, interestingly, with Krishnamurti, there was an eyewitness who I happened to stumble upon a couple of weeks ago. He was another British man, and he was there at the time that Krishnamurti, the young boy on the beach, was discovered. And I'm going to read out a bit of his testimony. By Ernest Wood. It comes from an essay from 1964 called No Religion Higher Than Truth. So I'm just going to read some extracts from this essay. Having been present on the occasion of the discovery of Krishnamurti, I am in a position to give a direct eyewitness account of the matter. We used to work together at Leadbeater's table up to as much as 14 hours a day, perhaps an average of 10 or 12. In the evening after 5 p.m, we used to knock off for an hour or so and go to swim in the Bay of Bengal. After a while, a group of boys began to come and watch us, and a little later they joined us in the water, at the invitation of one of our group. One evening, Mr. Leadbeater, on our return to his room after our swim, told me that one of the boys had a remarkable aura. I asked which one, and he said it was the boy named Krishnamurti. I was surprised, for I already knew the boys, and they had been coming to me and to Subramaniam in the evenings to help in connection with their school homework, and it was evident that Krishnamurti was not one of the bright students. Then Mr. Leadbeater told me that Krishnamurti would become a great spiritual teacher. I asked, "How great? As great as Mrs. Besant?" He replied, "Oh, much greater." And shortly after that he said that Krishnamurti would be the vehicle for the Lord Maitreya. Regarding Krishnamurti as one who was destined to become a great spiritual teacher, Mr. Leadbeater then added that if the father liked, he would write to Mrs. Besant and ask her interest in the boy's career. She might probably arrange for him to be educated in England later on. The desire of the heart of many Indian fathers for English education brought in its train considerable economic and social advantage in those days. In the meantime, he and his friends would see that Krishnamurti did not lack private tuition pending Mrs. Besant's return. Leadbeater put the typewritten manuscript into my hands and told me it was Krishnamurti's first book. The introduction began. "These are not my words, they are the words of the master who taught me." Next day I delivered my opinion, a delightful little book, but extremely simple. I remarked that there were one or two curious things about the manuscript. It was very much in Mr. Leadbeater's own style, and there were some sentences which were exactly the same as in a book of his which we had already prepared for the press. Leadbeater told me that he wished indeed that he might have been able to write such a book himself. As to the sentences I mentioned, he said he had usually been present when Krishnamurti was being taught in his astral body by the master. He remembered these points and had made use of them in meetings of the Theosophists, and so I had noted them down and had incorporated them into the material of his book, The Inner Life. As to the style, he said, it was but natural that he himself should have adopted something of his own master's style after himself being taught by him for so many years. I hope that it is now clear that it was Mr. Leadbeater who found Krishnamurti, and that Mrs. Besant later proclaimed the event and promoted the project with conviction and enthusiasm. Mrs. Besant told me afterwards that she had an arrangement with Mr. Leadbeater. She accepted his clairvoyance as if it were her own, and he loyally supported her decisions as to what to do. Life is short, and don't waste time. One further thing that I wanted to say was that there are many ancient legends about great kings, great gurus, great teachers, great sages, great eras, great kingdoms. It seems to me that human beings are primitive and immature, and their spirituality is simplistic. I'm not sure if anybody on this planet really has a complete answer. For sure, there are paths that will work and show you the light, and they are trustworthy. But I think we all have to get off our high horse. I think I hope that you will take what I've said about Krishnamurti in the right spirit.